Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the U.S. Center. Very excited for this event, Creating Pathways to Good Jobs in the Green Economy. And to kick us off, we have remarks from Thea Lee, the Deputy Undersecretary for International Affairs at the Department of Labor.
Thank you so much, and good morning, everybody. It is an enormous pleasure to be here with all of you today. And welcome to the U.S. Center. So I'm delighted to be here opening the panel that the U.S. Department of Labor has jointly organized with United Airlines, and many thanks to Tom Michaels, our partner in crime, on creating pathways to good jobs in the clean energy economy. And this is such an important topic for this important global gathering that we're having today, where we're doing stock taking, negotiating the future path, sharing victories, promising opportunities and challenges, but also building trust and cooperation. And one of the key issues is going to be, how do we ensure that working people are brought along at every step of the way? And this is important not just because it's the right thing to do, but because it also is going to create the political will to sustain the victories and the commitments that are made here at COP28. When faced with the prospect of job losses in fossil fuel industries or other parts of the green transition, if there are few pathways to good jobs, it is understandable that workers resist efforts to decarbonize. And this is true not just in the North, the global North, but also in the global South. If we want to achieve our net zero goals, we can only do it if we involve workers in the decision-making process at every stage. It ends up with better policy and better politics. In recent years, the UN Climate Change Conference has recognized the essential link between decent work and decarbonization. I am thrilled to be here to head the U.S. Department of Labor's first ever delegation to the COP, and to support the COP's focus on good jobs and the development of a just transition work plan. The Department of Labor is focused on empowering all workers and promoting good jobs, an essential foundation for achieving a just transition to a clean energy future. Good jobs allow everyone to share in prosperity. Many companies recognize that providing good jobs, including skills and career advancement, create a clear competitive advantage when it comes to recruitment, training, retention, and execution of a company's mission. And of course, unions are key to good jobs. Unions give workers a voice at work, allowing them to negotiate with management to provide fair pay, benefits, and worker protections. Unions also play a key role in workforce development systems in the United States and abroad. And so I'm delighted that Anna Fendley from the Steelworkers and Tom Michaels from United, as well as my colleague Annie Petsonk, are here for today's important panel. I am looking forward to sharing more of the work that the U.S. Department of Labor has done, but also to hearing from our social partners in labor and business about the work ahead, the work that we're doing currently, and how it will contribute to the kinds of ambitious goals that we are setting for ourselves here at COP28. And with that, I'm delighted to invite our moderator, Distinguished Fellow at the Atlantic Council's Global Energy Center, Randy Bell, to the stage. Randy.
Thank you, everybody. Welcome the other speakers to the stage as well. I want to welcome Tom Michaels, the director at United Airlines, Anna Fendley, the director of Regulatory and State Policy at the United Steelworkers, Annie Petsonk, Assistant Secretary of Aviation and International Affairs at the U.S. Department of Transportation, and then Matt Stevenson, the Chief Revenue Officer at Svante, is on his way. The Blue Zone gate he was trying to get in was closed, so he's trying another way. So he's going to get in momentarily. But we're going to get started, and I want to first go to Deputy Undersecretary Lee. What measures is the U.S. government taking to pursue a just transition for the workforce, particularly in the area of workforce development, as it takes action to address climate change?
Thank you, Randy, for that question. So the U.S. government is committed to creating pathways to good jobs in the clean energy economy. And we are focused on shared economic growth and opportunity from the bottom up and the middle out, including by ensuring that the federal investments that we're making to ensure a clean energy transition are supporting good jobs with family-sustaining wages, good benefits, and dignified and equitable working conditions. I think, as everybody knows, in his first month in office, President Biden signed an executive order on tackling the climate crisis at home and abroad. And one of the key elements was establishing the Justice 40 initiative with the goal that disadvantaged communities will receive 40% of the benefits of certain federal clean economy investments, including investments in training and workforce development. So I think one of the key things is that the clean energy transition creates challenges, but it also creates opportunities. As new jobs are being created, the question is, are they good jobs? And what can we do as the U.S. government to make them good jobs? So, and also to address equity issues that are longstanding. So I think the Justice 40 initiative is one important piece of it. And of course, I think everybody knows the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act invest hundreds of billions of dollars into the development and deployment of clean energy technologies, but while also very clearly supporting decent work. The Inflation Reduction Act improves the quality of jobs in clean energy industries by offering enhanced tax benefits for clean energy projects that pay good wages and utilize registered apprenticeships. And the Biden administration is implementing this law at a historic pace. U.S. government agencies have already announced the availability of $70 billion in grants, rebates, and other non-loan funding, and launched over half the grant programs that are funded by the law. And the private sector is responding. It has announced over $110 billion in new clean energy investments since the bill's passage, and over $235 billion since President Biden took office. The Department of Labor is leveraging competitive grants to help dislocated workers and new job seekers in these communities to help them develop skills in growing sectors, including the clean energy sector, so that no one is left behind. And we are also focused, and I think Tom's going to talk about this also more, we are focused on the expansion of registered apprenticeships to address the growing demand for skilled workers in the clean economy. Registered apprenticeships create earn-as-you-learn, high-quality career pathways for workers while also developing a skilled workforce for employers. It helps workers develop relevant industry skills through paid work experience. I think one of the key things about registered apprenticeships is that workers are paid as they are learning, but they're also working directly with employers to make sure that there is a job at the end of the day, that they're not training in a vacuum. They're training for jobs that employers know they're going to need, and they're earning an income while they do so. The other key piece is that registered apprenticeships provide a nationally recognized portable credential so that there's advantages for the worker and there's advantages for the employer. There are several clean energy-related registered apprenticeship programs for high-demand occupations, including hydroelectric station operators, machine operators, wind turbine technicians, and geothermal operators. Many of the traditional registered apprenticeship programs involve climate-related work, such as electricians, plumbers, and laborers. And we have a program at the Department of Labor that I'm proud of, the Women in Apprenticeship and Non-Traditional Occupations Grant Program, which provides support for training of women to enter the skilled trades and other occupations in which women have historically been underrepresented, including in the clean economy. So making sure that we are making these opportunities available to some groups that have not always been able to take advantage of them in the past. And just a couple more quick things. In September, the United States launched the American Climate Corps, which will train more than 20,000 young Americans in clean energy, conservation, and climate resilience-related skills, from restoring coastal wetlands to deploying clean energy, while creating pathways to high-quality, good-paying clean energy and climate resilience jobs in both the public and the private sector, also prioritizing some of the communities that have been left behind. And in September, we announced nearly $94 million in grants to support 34 public-private partnerships to provide worker-centered training programs to meet workforce needs created by the Investing in America agenda, including the clean energy economy. And we've also supported the Just Energy Transition Partnerships with many other partners, mobilizing billions of dollars to help developing nations move toward clean energy in a just manner, recognizing the key role of reskilling and upskilling in making the transition. So those are a couple of the many things that we've done. And I just wanted to say, in terms of the work that's being done here at COP28, the Just Transition Work Program is an essential element that we are all focused on, that we hope can really keep a focus on workers, worker rights, worker protection, social protection, so that as we make the difficult transitions in both the global north and the global south, that we are not leaving any workers behind. So thank you, Randy.
Thank you so much. And I just want to tell an anecdote because this stuff is actually working. I'm a consultant, and I'm advising companies on clean energy projects, et cetera, and I'm watching companies in real time make decisions about using union labor and good quality jobs so that they can get those tax credits. And these are decisions for 20 or 30-year projects that they might not have otherwise made. So this is really working, and it's amazing to see it happen, play out right in front of my eyes in real time as they're making decisions about major investments across the country.
Amazing.
But this leads to the private sector, and we have two private sector representatives on the stage. Welcome, Matt. I'm glad that you were able to get in. President Biden's Investing in America agenda, including the Inflation Reduction Act, it combines clean energy incentives with labor provisions, as we were discussing. Is the private sector and other actors prepared to meet this challenge? Can the policy pairs help achieve a more just transition? So let's hear from the private sector first.
So I'll start off. I'm Tom Michaels with United Airlines. I'm very honored to be here. We've been on an incredible journey since the pandemic forced a significant contraction in air travel, and that certainly impacted our workforce. And then post-pandemic, there was this explosion in interest in air travel, and consequently, we've been desperate for talent. And the traditional sources of talent for our pilots, or our flight attendants, or our mechanics, really weren't pushing, weren't churning out enough candidates. And so of necessity, we've had to think more expansively, more inclusively, and look at new and diverse sources for talent, and think about breaking down the barriers to these really, really great careers. If you're a pilot, you were very well compensated today. It takes a long time to train you, and it takes a long time to develop those skills, but these are fantastic careers. And so we started looking at all of our job categorizations and starting to look at what are sort of the criteria that we've always said, well, you got to have this even to become considered for this particular this particular occupation. You must have a 4-year degree. You have to have at least this much experience. You have to have X, Y, and Z. And we started realizing that a lot of those criteria were really dated, or were for a time when we had so many applicants that we could just turn them away, and that was just an easy way of pruning folks out. And it's been a great learning. So now we've developed a much more skills-based, holistic hiring process where we look at what you bring and what we can give you on the job. An awful lot of what all of us do in our everyday lives is learned on the job. And so we decided to just start people off, right? You might be for example, our mechanics apprenticeships. We decided, rather than waiting for folks to go through about 2 years of training on average, that costs them out of their pocket $50,000 to $70,000, that they then have to go and take a test from our friends at the FAA, and they get their A&P license. This is for aircraft mechanics. Very, very discrete set of skills that are involved there, and it takes a while to get them. But what we learned is that we were really training those folks all over again once we got them out of those schools. And so we decided to set up a 3-year apprenticeship that allows folks that are right out of high school to come in. They're earning while they learn. So instead of spending $50,000 to $70,000, they're earning $33 an hour in most locations. And they are getting at least 300 hours of classroom time each year. They're working with a dedicated mentor every day at work, and they're learning the skills that they will need at United specifically to work on commercial jet engines. Huge, just a life-changing experience for a lot of folks. And we did it in concert with our friends at the International Brotherhood of Teamsters. And that's been a great experience as well. It helped us navigate the registered apprenticeship process at the Department of Labor, which is not always straightforward. And certainly working with the Teamsters on that made it a lot easier. It certainly made it a lot easier to sort of socialize this amongst our existing workforce. We opened it up to people that are already at United first, something that was really eye-opening to me. So we have different levels of aircraft mechanics. And the folks that are actually able to work on the planes require these licenses, but we brought in people that were in lower, more entry-level jobs, but in many cases they'd been there for 10 and 15 years, and they never had the time to go to school and get their A&P license. They never had the money to go to school and get that A&P license. So our first crop of apprentices had been with United for over a decade, and we're never going to be able to break down that barrier and go that next level in their career development, and this apprenticeship has changed all that. That's just one example of how we can break down barriers. United is a big company. We're mostly unionized already, but we're working now with a lot of partners in the clean energy sector who are all startups effectively, or smaller companies. They're relying a lot on contracted labor. They are, going through very rocky periods with their financing. And I think we need to also look at those approaches that may not, the very large company model that works for United Airlines or an IBM or somebody like that, may not work for the Savantes of the world. And they have to diversify and be inclusive in their talent acquisition as well. And, I think I would love to hear what Matt has to say about that as well, and their journey, because they're one of our partners developing decarbonization solutions.
Absolutely, yeah. Thanks for that introduction. So Savante Technologies, Inc., we're a carbon capture and removal technology provider. So probably a little bit of a unique perspective up on this panel, and very happy to have United along as a partner and investor in us. We've been around for about 16 years, and so I've been there for about 9 of those years along that journey, and seen us grow from 25 people to 300 people today, which was quite exciting. And a lot of that hiring was very much focused on equity and inclusion, but also on accessing all levels of the labor stack that are required to deliver these types of technologies. So what we do is we provide the equipment, the advanced materials, and the process technology that can capture and separate CO2 from either smokestacks, industrial processes, or directly out of the air. That in many ways enables things like sustainable aviation fuels, which is part of the reason for the collaboration with United. But what it also means is that the energy transition is a hardware business, right? More than a software business. That means a tremendous amount of manufacturing labor. We need to build things. Manufacturing labor, construction labor is going to be required to actually mitigate the gigatons of CO2 that we need to in order to achieve our climate goals. So while we scale up our workforce, obviously skilled engineers and PhDs in chemistry and all those sorts of folks, but also quite a bit of manufacturing is going to be required. Thousands of manufacturing jobs in the United States to ultimately achieve the goals that we have, around 10 gigatons even of carbon capture and removal. But maybe an interesting perspective that I can provide specifically in the United States is the importance of the IRA and 45Q to the business model. Really, when it comes to carbon capture and removal in the United States, the majority of that business model relies on the 45Q tax credits or its equivalents. And within that Inflation Reduction Act was these specific requirements around prevailing wages and around, of course, the Registered Apprenticeship Program. But many of these projects are also getting direct federal support out of the bipartisan infrastructure law, the bill. And that comes with its own requirements. And to be competitive, what we've seen our partners do, the companies that are actually taking our technology and building it in the United States on their refineries and their cement plants and their assets, is they are way ahead of the game in trying to understand those requirements and be competitive to get that funding. So I can think of one partner that a year in advance of making a formal submission for funding, was already thinking about how they could convert a local schoolhouse into a training center for union labor associated with the International Brotherhood of Operating Engineers, and casting around as far as and wide as they could in the local area to see what access to union labor for construction they would have, but certainly with every intent of meeting the prevailing wage requirement. So we're seeing in real time and on the ground the impact of those policies in changing the behavior of industrial companies, and they're ready for it. They're willing and able, and they're getting ahead of the curve.
Thank you so much. I want to pivot to Anna for a second and actually talk about it from the workers' perspective. How are workers thinking about the energy transition, and in particular the IRA and other Biden administration clean energy policies?
Thank you for that question. So I'm Anna Fenley. I represent the United Steelworkers Union, which is the largest industrial union in North America. And I'm always thrilled to be able to talk about just transition, which, a little bit of history is, a concept that was pioneered by Tony Mazzocchi of the Oil, Chemical, and Atomic Workers, which eventually merged in, and those members are now part of our union. And really the concept is about making sure that workers have a seat at the table and that they're made whole in significant economic disruption. And I think the energy transition we can all agree is economic transformation as well. So I think we think about this in a few ways. I mean, the first thing that I say a lot is the most just transition is not to displace anyone. So thinking about technology, utilizing carbon capture, training existing workers with new skills to grow and change as the company grows and changes. That's incredibly important in this discussion. I think the second piece is the new jobs that Thea talked about being created by the Inflation Reduction Act, the bipartisan infrastructure law, making sure that those are high road, high wage, preferably union jobs from the get-go, that we're not starting at a low floor, we're starting at a high floor where people have rights, have living wages. And then the third piece is really the tough conversation within the labor movement that we have a lot, which is about what happens to the workers whose jobs we can't protect. And there is a lot of pain. There will be a lot of pain likely in this transition in certain places. And so I think it's important to ground this conversation in that reality. I'll just give an example. We've been spending a lot of time working with our members and former members who used to work at the Marathon oil refinery in Martinez, California. We had about 360 members lose their jobs there in 2020 when the refinery shut down. And a few have been brought back. The company decided to start making renewable fuels there, so they brought back about 40 or 50. But we took a look. We worked with a researcher who actually 2 years after that event did a survey of our members, and about half of them responded to the survey, and more than half of those who responded, so about a third of the workers who were laid off 2 years later were unemployed or underemployed. And that's a huge challenge if we're thinking about this energy transition. And training is a wonderful thing, but I think we need to make sure that we are not just putting it on the worker to go figure out their own training themselves and then figure out a job, but that we're creating real pathways. And the last thing I'll mention is just some work that the state of California has been doing around that, around oil and gas workers. Last year in the state budget, the legislature passed a $40 million pilot program for displaced oil and gas workers to focus on helping those workers get into training, do job search, but also to help make that economic bridge, right? So that if they need childcare, they can help pay for childcare. If they need a stipend for transportation to get to that training or get to that job search, that's available. And it brings in the concept of partnership, so that there are employers at the table, so that we're actually creating pathways for these folks to find work. So I think the bottom line from the labor perspective, and this is something we're thinking about and talking about here in the context of these negotiations, but also at the national, subnational, and the worksite level, is we all need to be at the table. Government needs to be at the table. Workers need to be at the table. Companies need to come to the table too. And we need to have these discussions, because these are actually human people's lives that are being potentially thrown into disarray.
And this is why the energy community provisions in the IRA are so important, because it really encourages companies to site in those communities where fossil workers are being displaced. So obviously not easy. There's a lot of work that has to be done, but at least that's in the right direction. Are you seeing companies making siting decisions based on that?
Yes, there is some. There's certainly some. I mean, and there are immense financial incentives to do so. I think we're going to have to see if the provisions of the IRA can meet the scale of the potential problem, right? I think there's a lot of focus on coal communities. There are, of course, power plant communities, oil communities, et cetera. So it needs to be an ongoing discussion.
Yep. Annie, I want to pivot to you. You were at the Department of Transportation working on international issues. Now, in the United States, transportation is the largest source of emissions, so obviously is the area where there's a lot of focus on the energy transition. How are you seeing, and you're working internationally, though, of course, it's a huge source of emissions internationally. How are you seeing labor issues play out and just transition issues play out as you're working on decarbonization of the transportation sector?
Thanks very much, and thanks to the U.S. Center and the Department of Labor and United Airlines for bringing this event together. As you mentioned, transportation is our nation's largest emitting sector. Industrial emissions are also 22% of U.S. emissions, and a large portion of those come from activities making infrastructure for transportation. So overall, transportation is a very significant contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. And so the transition of moving to decarbonize the transportation sector is a formidable challenge, and one that must engage labor management across the sector. We also operate in the Department of Transportation with safety as our North Star. So all of our work on transportation, including workforce and workforce transition, starts from the premise that safety is the driving goal of the Department of Transportation. Let me talk about 3 C's: collaboration, cooperation, and communication. Collaboration, we have a memorandum of understanding with the Department of Labor that helps our 2 agencies work together to identify programs that might be in one or the other agency that can help provide training for workers, both to bring them into the transportation sector, responding, as Tom pointed out, to the massive increase in demand for connectivity in the aviation arena, but also to provide training for worker transition. Cooperation. Our competitive grant applications, our notices of funding opportunity, or NOFOs, as they're called in the business, provide that if there are project-related training and worker transition requirements, the NOFOs provide that the portion of the grants can be used for those purposes. And I think that's very important. It's something that not all of our grant applicants keep in mind, and that's where the term communication comes in. How do we communicate to states, localities, to workers, and to companies about this tremendous need for the transition? It comes at us in many different directions. I find that many young people I talk with are really not captivated by the idea of flying or training to become an active participant in the aviation industry. That's very different than 20 years ago, 40 years ago, when the magic of aviation was something that enticed my father to become a pilot, my brothers to become pilots, and nearly enticed me in that direction as well. Instead, young people are very interested in drones, automated and advanced air mobility. We are very interested in those parts of the aviation sector as well, but we're going to have to keep the bulk of the aviation sector flying while these new forms of aviation mature, and that means cooperation, collaboration, and communication with regard to worker training and worker transition. There's another piece as the aviation sector moves to decarbonize, and that has to do with sustainable fuels. Sustainable fuels for aviation, for maritime, and for every aspect of the transportation sector, and that's something that maybe we can talk about in the next round of questions. Thanks.
That sounds great. Thank you so much. We do want to open this up to audience questions as well. So if you have any, feel free to jump in. Just raise your hand and we'll call on you. But since you talked about sustainable fuels, I think this means we have to talk to Tom about how you're thinking about sustainable aviation fuel as part of the solution, but then what this means for workers, and how that actually translates into some of the questions that Anna was raising about, let's say, refinery workers and oil and gas workers.
Yeah, so really critical question. Aviation needs liquid fuels, right? Unless we replace all of our passengers with batteries, we won't be able to have enough batteries in an aircraft to make it over the ocean. And so we really do need to have liquid fuels in there. What we're trying to change is what the feedstock that makes those liquid fuels are. So you're moving from crude oil to things like used cooking oil, or to agricultural waste and things like that. And so a lot of that can be done by utilizing existing refinery infrastructure, existing fuels infrastructure, existing pipelines and things like that. But there will need to be changes. There will need to be changes to what the workers know and how they do it. And so we're working with our partners that are trying to reskill, upskill, and get those folks ready to be able to manage that. But there will be changes. There will be new facilities built. That's a great opportunity for the workforce. But they got to go somewhere, and it's still an industrial site, so it still goes into a community. I'm really very keenly watching how we make these siting decisions. We clearly want to incentivize. We want communities that have been maybe cut out of a lot of economic progress to be able to access that and to be a part of that economic progress when there's a new facility being built. But at the same time, there are environmental justice issues. Those facilities have emissions. They have trucks that go through, and when you build stuff, it's big, it's dirty, it's noisy. So there's a balance there, right? Obviously, we're working with one of our fuel partners, Fulcrum Bioenergy. They will take municipal solid waste, otherwise known as garbage, and turn that into sustainable aviation fuel. Great opportunity. They're looking to site a plant in Gary, Indiana, and they're confronting some pretty significant pushback on that plant. And so we really do need to use the 3 C's to engage that community, let them know that this is a benefit for us, it's a benefit for the environment, and hopefully it'll be a benefit for the workers that are involved in that plant. And that's a process, right? And it does involve working with our labor partners. It involves working with the regulators and explaining, I think, what the change actually is. A lot of this, green jobs aren't different than other jobs. They're jobs, right? And so all of us are taking our current jobs and making them green, right? We have to do that and build that ethos into what we're doing every day. And this issue about collaboration and communication, I think, is going to be a critical piece of a successful transition.
Thanks, Tom. Thea, you want to jump in?
Sure. And thank you for that, Tom. I think your point is exactly right, that, green jobs are jobs. And I think in the past we made a mistake in the last couple of decades where the workers were always pitted against the environment. It was like, well, you can either have good jobs in the auto sector or, there's going to be a solar panel and that's all going to be imported and it's going to be, done with non-union labor. And so if we don't force workers to make that terrible choice, I think we are much better positioned to get the community support that we're going to need, as we make the transition. So new technology is a great thing. We ought to be able to make transitions to new technology so long as we're not telling workers, oh, the cost of the new technology, by the way, is all the good union jobs go away and there's going to be a bunch of crummy jobs here. And so I'm thrilled to hear both of you talk a little bit about both how the policies are making a change, and I think this is an important lesson for COP28, putting in place proactive government policies that actually require good jobs as a component and incentivize unionization, incentivize workers being at the table. I mean, I think that's really key to success if we want to be able to, go home and sell these policies.
I'll just add one thing here, and I think that the example of sustainable aviation fuel is a great one to hook on. And that's the ripple effect, right? United Airlines is very focused on their fuel sources and becoming more sustainable. That does impact their employees, but it impacts employees at other places, and they're creating demand for a different product than they've been buying in the past. And these government solutions are incredibly important, and ensuring that we're reskilling existing fuels workers. But I'll just underscore that it doesn't mean that United Airlines doesn't have to be at the table when we're talking about this, right? United Airlines, the fuels companies, all those folks need to be at the table to figure out with us and with government how we make this work for the future.
Anna, you raised this topic, so you want to talk about it.
2 weeks ago, here in Dubai, the nations of the world that are members of the International Civil Aviation Organization, or ICAO, agreed to set a target, a voluntary target, that by 2030, 5% reduction in carbon dioxide emissions from international aviation achieved through the use of sustainable aviation fuels, low carbon, and other low carbon forms of energy. Last week, the first transatlantic commercial airliner flying entirely on sustainable aviation fuel flew from London to New York. The market is beginning to see that policy is shifting, and investment will flow into the development of sustainable aviation fuels. The impact of that, including the impact on workers and communities, I think can be evaluated or not evaluated, but looked at through a fourth C. I said collaboration, cooperation, and communication. The fourth C is coconuts. What do I mean by that? I met a mayor of a town in Colombia who was facing a problem. Her community's water supply was being disrupted by coconut hulls. The community produces a lot of coconut oil and coconut meat and the coconut drinks that you like to drink in the heat of summer. The hulls from the coconuts are waste, and they were going into the water supply and fouling the water supply. Those coconuts would be a great source for sustainable aviation fuel. Communities looking at problems that affect the lives of people in the community can see potential opportunities to take these problems, whether it's coconut, I'm going to go for C's here, coconut hulls, coffee hulls when you wash the coffee beans and the part of the coffee that comes off also clogs the water supply. It's a waste. Cacao. Who here does like chocolate? Anybody like chocolate? When you eat the chocolate, you're eating the core part of the cacao bean, but the outer part is a waste. What happens to that waste? It could be made into a fuel. These are opportunities that can help people. They can help workers too. And if you'll indulge me one more minute on that, the flight that went from London to New York, flying on sustainable aviation fuel, that fuel smelled different. If you flew here, maybe you smell that kind of stinky smell that you get sometimes inside the airplane when they're filling the plane up, and you smell a kind of, yucky smell. That smell is because when you put the fuel into the tank of the plane, you have to have some of the stinky stuff, otherwise known as toxic aromatics, to cause the rubber seals in the aircraft to swell and keep the fuel from leaking. That, in most airplanes and most flights today, that stinky stuff comes from fossil fuel. And when the workers are putting that stuff into the plane, that smell, I'm not a public health expert. I'll ask you, Anna, if it's good for us or not. But the fuel that went into the transatlantic 100% sustainable aviation fuel flight had aromatics made from plant material, not from fossil fuel. So it smelled different. It didn't have as much toxics in it. This is where the future, I think, must be, that we must look at worker health and safety, good jobs, and protecting the environment through the 3 C's and whatever, 4th C, coconuts, coffee, whatever you want to add for the 4th C.
Thank you. Coconuts, that's where I've got a new business idea, so let's talk afterwards. So we've been talking a little bit about industries that are part of the energy transition that are adjacent, new but adjacent to existing industries like SAF. But for Matt, carbon capture, direct air capture, that's a whole new thing. That's not something that, we thought we were thinking about 20 years ago. So how are you thinking about labor when you're starting from scratch and building an industry from scratch?
Yeah, that's a great question. So a comment was made earlier about this idea of not pitting the labor against the environmental transition, let's say. And I think in some sense people think about the energy transition as a story of software, they think about technology as digital, they think about electrons, right? So renewables, all of those things. But I think, this conversation around sustainable aviation fuels is so important because it reminds us that the energy transition is very much a story about molecules. And when you're talking about molecules, even though you're talking about brand new technologies, you're talking about a number of the same skill sets and types of expertise that are required in today's industry around refining. So just to give you an example, we've talked about some different routes to get to sustainable aviation fuels. The most sort of extraordinary route, I would say, which is one that we're involved in, is you can take CO2 directly out of the atmosphere. You can use renewable electricity to split water and create hydrogen. You can take that CO2 molecule and that hydrogen molecule and combine them to create a carbon neutral fuel. So that sounds, pretty high tech and like it's going to be a brand new labor base. But, once you've gotten your CO2 and your H2 together, you need to refine it. You have the same separation steps that you have in many refinery unit operations. When you build that facility, you need steel and concrete and, rebar work and piping and ducting and all of the same skills you need in the development of any infrastructure. So I think from our perspective, even though we're sort of leaning out there on the bleeding edge of technology and really pushing the boundary in our view around carbon neutrality, everything that we engage with around constructing our projects is very much skill sets that exist today. And certainly there does need to be training and reskilling, but I would say the thing that keeps me up at night the most about the labor force is the potential gap in the amount of labor that's going to be required. So when you talk about the hundreds of thousands of jobs per year that the Inflation Reduction Act would create, and more than that according to some estimates, the jobs that are already being created by the bipartisan infrastructure law, when we talk to our EPC, our engineering, procurement, and construction partners that actually build the capture plants, they're worried about the availability of labor over the next 10 years. To meet any of our climate goals, it means really millions of jobs globally, and those are skilled. It's non-college educated, but it's skilled, and it requires a lot of training.
I could just add, I think the apprentice element of the Inflation Reduction Act is a huge challenge and an opportunity, right? A lot of the companies that are in this space that have some new technology that they're trying to pilot and make into an actual, bring to commercialization so they can sell it to United Airlines or another big company and help them decarbonize. They need to find a way to get those workers to build those skills and set up these apprenticeships. I think there's going to be a lot of people that are looking at apprenticeships that weren't before, thanks to the fact that you get more money under the Inflation Reduction Act for these incentives if you have apprenticeships in place. And so they're going to be turning to partners in the labor union and asking them, how do we do this? They're going to be going to the Department of Labor, the heretofore fairly sleepy workforce development boards in some towns, and say, I have 10,000 people I want to hire. How do we get this started? And so it's going to be a process, it's going to be a lot of a challenge, but I think it's also a huge opportunity.
And I'll just say it's a huge opportunity for jobs and for work. And there's this wonderful virtuous cycle that our members who make steel and cement are so excited to provide steel and cement to build all these new plants and also decarbonize those steel and cement plants. So I think we have a bright future ahead as long as we're all working together.
So we are at about the 2-minute warning here. We'll take one question from the audience, and then I want to do rapid fire concluding remarks, 30 seconds each. Right here.
Sure, I'm Derek Walker from EDF, and my question is, we're all talking about good jobs, a lot of the announcements that have happened with the new funding have occurred in regions of the country that aren't as favorable or supportive of worker rights and union density, and so I'm wondering how we navigate that tension.
It's a great question. Who wants to take that?
Well, I think I would say that some of the policies that we're talking about that are built in are designed to offset some of those negativity, and to say you want to get the extra benefits, then you need to make sure that you are demonstrating you have good jobs, that you have workers at the table, that you are taking advantage of these apprenticeships. And I think that's exactly right. This isn't a question of like forcing anything down anybody's throat. It is a question of saying there are benefits for you here as a company to not just invest in clean energy, but to invest in good jobs and to invest in union jobs. And, you know, certainly I think this is a great opportunity for the labor movement, to new organizing opportunities that will be, you know, the pressure on the labor movement to take advantage of the opportunities that can be created by these new jobs.
Thank you. Okay, so we have 1 minute left. So rapid fire, final remarks. We'll start down at Matt and work our way this way.
Sure. Maybe just a concluding remark is really about the all-of-the-above strategy. So, you know, I think this week we're hearing a lot of polarity around the conversation in terms of the energy transition. And I think having conversations like this where you're bringing workers to the table and having them be a part of the conversation reminds us that we can't be thinking there's a silver bullet. We can't be purist or ideological about the solutions to the energy transition. It really needs to consider all available and sustainable technologies today, and that we need to deploy those as quickly as possible. We're running out of time, so we don't have time to wait for the one perfect solution. We really need to use the technologies we have today and to start the journey together.
Couldn't agree more. Keep those 3 C's in mind. Go find your 4th C, and we'll do it together.
Anna.
Workers need a seat at the table. They overwhelmingly want careers and unions and a voice, not just jobs.
Other than coconuts, which is my top line takeaway, I think make your job a green job today, right? You know, our mechanics that are working today on diesel automobiles are seeing more and more electric vehicles come through, and we need to train them to deal with that. Their job is becoming a green job. They are not going anywhere. They're just changing a little bit about what they do, and it's in a phased process. That's happening for me. Certainly, I started my career in the oil and gas industry, and so I think make your job a green job. It's a great opportunity.
Okay, and today's panel brings, I think, a lot of optimism and a bright spot that when you bring good jobs and our environmental goals together, they both are more likely to succeed. So thanks to everybody for being here today, and thank you so much, Randy, for your great moderation.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. I think we can all agree the energy transition is crucial, but it will not happen. We will not be successful if we do not bring everyone along for the ride. That means that we really need to make labor part of the solution, as we're discussing. This is one of the largest economic transitions in human history. There will obviously be changes to how the economy is structured, but it is a policy-driven transition. And so we can create the policies to make sure that labor is brought along and so that it is successful. So thank you all again so much for being here. Thank you in the audience and for those of you watching online. And I know there'll be another program again here shortly.